We're switching gears to the nervous system, and we're going to open it up with a little trailer. I hope it plays.
See that guy? That's me. My excuse for looking like this? I'm a writer.
Eddie, maybe it's time to let the writing go.
But just in case you think nothing ever happened to me.
Eddie Mora!
Hey, tell me about this book. Well, how much have you written on it? How will it work?
Well, I suppose I can help you with that. You know how they say that we can only access 20% of our brain? This lets you access all of it. They've had clinical trials and it's FDA approved.
I just out of curiosity, and that's all. I was blind, but now I see. A tablet a day, and I was limitless. I now had cultural appetites.
Since when do you speak Italian?
I finished my book in 4 days. I'd like to renegotiate my advance. Math became useful.
12,000 to 2.3 million in 10 days. I'm baffled by this guy.
So, Eddie Mora, you do know you're a freak. What's your secret?
Medication.
Okay. If you want to see the rest, you'll have to Netflix it. How many of you have seen that movie, Limitless? I found it intriguing. So intriguing, it made it into a lecture, but what do you guys think? You guys like it? Yeah. Feeling it's ever going to happen. This is an old story. We've been trying to do this. We've been studying it. Neurophysiologists have been studying it for a long time. Right? So it's a fascinating topic. And the question is, do you actually use all of your brain? Next week might be less than this week. That's what I'm worried about. Okay? But no, we don't use all of the brain. The exact percent is debated. So the question is, are there ways that we can actually leverage a bigger percentage of the brain? And that's been plaguing neurophysiologists for a long time. One of the things that we know about the brain is it's tremendously plastic. We call this the plasticity of the nervous system. So one theory as to why we don't use all of the brain, or the central nervous system, is because if something was to go wrong, let's say for example a stroke, and we were to survive, maybe we could leverage areas that weren't being used, and we can sort of rewire or find an alternative pathway in order to continue to send that signal to the right end destination. The example I think about is GPS, right? How many of you use GPS and have an app that's, has he or she yell at you with like street language? Have you seen that? Have you heard those? Those are pretty funny. You can download these apps and they're, talking at you with a slang or an accent, or right, like a Brooklyn accent. That's my favorite one. Anybody from Brooklyn? Oh, okay, good. I didn't want to insult you, but the app's pretty funny. So, like a GPS app, if you've made a wrong turn, it says, at your next earliest convenience, please make a left. And it finds an alternative route. And the nervous system can do that to a certain extent. It's pretty incredible. So we can't regenerate central nervous systems. We've already talked about that. We can't regenerate central nervous system nerves. But because of the plasticity of the brain, and because not all of it's being utilized at any one given time, we have the ability for some rewiring to occur. And we can find alternate pathways in order for that same activity to take place. So it's a pretty cool area of research. Not one that I spend a lot of time in. I am by no means an expert. But many of you might go on and you may actually find some solutions that help us to tap into a bigger part of the brain. Or maybe it's for regenerative type of things, or rehabilitation in patients. It may not be to live a fancy lifestyle like what's portrayed in this movie. It may be for other types of reasons. But is the potential there? I would say Theoretically, yes. But what we're left with is this study material for now, and this is what would set the stage for you to continue exploring if that was a passion of yours, if that was an interest of yours.
I know this is like going off topic.
We never do that.
No, well, the thing is, I've heard some people say, and of course no one really knows if it's true or not, but I've heard some people say that there are certain individuals who can access more of their brain and they're capable of having spiritual experiences, like they can sense ghosts and things like that. Like they can see ghosts and things like that.
So the space is EEGs, right? EEGs is an electrical map of your brain. And we see different brain rhythms at different times of the day. We see different brain rhythms in different areas of the brain lighting up, depending upon if you're right brain dominant or left brain dominant, depending on if you're a male or a female, depending upon your life experiences. So the answer to that question is absolutely. Nobody's brain map here would look like anybody else's. We all would utilize different brain activity. Generally speaking, they look similar, but they would have their own unique signature, almost like a fingerprint. Okay? So in lab, you guys covered a lot of this material, but we want, for sake of completeness, I want to go over it. The brain, some general features, right? Stay with me. We'll get into some new stuff, I promise. Hemispheres. We have a right and a left side. We're going to talk in subsequent lectures here in the near future about right brain and left brain dominance. Okay? It isn't that you don't use both sides of your brain. All of us use both sides of our brain. It's like a dual core processor. You have two brains, and they're connected together by the corpus callosum, which is this main track of white matter that tells the right side and the left side what's going on. We also know that that corpus callosum is not only white matter, which is myelinated, we also know that other parts of the brain are myelinated and other parts of the brain are unmyelinated. Those would be called gray matter. We know that we have these invaginations. We have these hills and these valleys of the brain, and that functions to increase the surface area. The surface area of the brain is much, much larger than what you see because of the folding that takes place. Within the primate kingdom, the surface area of our brain, not only is our brain by volume, like brain volume to body volume, one of the largest, with the largest frontal cortex, it also has the greatest amount of surface area of any of the primates, definitely of any of the mammals. Okay? The gyri, or the ridges, if you will, or the gyrus, which is singular, or the sulci, which are the invaginations, or the valleys, or sulcus for singular. That increases our surface area, and our hemispheres are divided down the middle. You can see, obviously, by the longitudinal fissure. You can see this longitudinal fissure that clearly separates the right hemisphere from the left hemisphere. Now, what's interesting about this is, in fact, tomorrow we're going to have a guest lecture in pathology. And if some of you are interested in coming, this is part of the lecture that you need in order for you to hear the guest lecture. So we're tracking really nicely. If you want to come tomorrow, you are welcome to attend. It's 2:20 to 4:20 in Bio 256. Okay, he's a retired medical school professor. He happens to be one of my neighbors. And he's been teaching this lecture because his area of study was on central nervous system disorders, looking at Alzheimer's patients. Okay, the lecture material may be above your head, to play a pun, but you might find it fascinating. This is a field that you're interested in studying. Dr. Michael Miller is his name. Bio 256, tomorrow 2:20 to 4:20. Okay. I don't remember the name. It's somewhere on the East Coast. I'll have to look it up for you. I have to look it tonight because I have to introduce him tomorrow. And I can never remember what school it was. The longitudinal fissure separates the right side from the left side. And what we know from studies, and Dr. Miller will talk about this tomorrow, we know that early in life, we use both sides of the brain and they can do equal activities. It isn't until we start getting to the age of 5 and on up where we start separating what we call hemispheric specialization. So for example, if you ask a 3-year-old to draw you a picture, one day they may draw with the right hand with a crayon, the next day they pick up it with the left hand. But by 5, the hemispheres have specialized. And by 5, they actually have decided which hand is dominant. And it's pretty well documented. Okay? I have 3 right-handed children and 1 left-handed child. My wife is lefty, and so early in life we were watching our youngest, who's a lefty, kind of battle with the crayon on which side she was going to use. Now she's clearly moved to the left side. And then by the age of 10 is another major milestone. By the age of 10, the specialization is almost complete. And the way that we know this is, how many of you are bilingual or beyond? Speak more than 2 languages, 2 or more. Those of you that are bilingual, how many people tell you in your native tongue and in your secondary tongue that you have no accent, no perceivable accent? Maybe a few, okay? Many times, not always, but most of you that are raising your hand that are bilingual or beyond, that probably don't have a perceivable accent, my guess is you learned those 2 languages before the age of 10. Okay? How many of you that's true? And the reason for that is, by the age of 10, the hemispheres have specialized so much, they're 2 separate brains. And the right side is doing certain things, and the left side is doing certain things, and they're in synchrony because of the corpus callosum. And that residual accent you have is there because the hemispheres have already specialized. But if you learn the language or the second tongue earlier in life, you're less likely to have that accent. And so you can see it play itself out socially in this country all over the place because of the fact that we're starting to speak many, many, many more languages. And you see it in other nations very prolifically. It's not uncommon in Europe for children to be speaking at least 2 or 3 languages because they are traveling all the time and the countries are really nearby each other. So this brain structure is quite fascinating, and we're just scratching the surface. If we look at the surface, though, just beneath the surface, deep, we've got these meningeal layers of coverings. The brain is protected. We have 3 main layers. We have our dura mater. We have that's the most superficial layer. You can see the dura mater here. As we move more deep, we have the arachnoid mater, and then we move deep to that, we have the pia mater. And just underneath the arachnoid mater, between the arachnoid and the pia, we have the subarachnoid space. And that subarachnoid space houses fluid, cerebral spinal fluid. That cerebral spinal fluid is critically important to the function of the brain. In essence, how many of you bob for apples? Seriously? Like 5 of you have had a childhood? I mean, seriously, maybe I should bring in a bin of apples and, really try to be a father figure in your life and let you bob for apples. You could Google it or YouTube it, okay? It's pretty fun. You fill up a basin full of water, okay, and then you put some apples. You don't even really have to wash them because they're washed in the water, okay? And you're going to be tasting everybody's spit anyway, so who cares if you wash the apple, right? And usually, you put all these apples so much that they fill the surface, so there's apples touching the edges, and you're supposed to put your hands behind your back and just go in with your face, right? And like some people have like a side approach, right? Or they're, it's just like the sleeping giant kind of approach, or they just go in, and you're supposed to spear them in your teeth, right? Well, they float. The idea, the analogy is our brain floats in a bucket of fluid, like those apples are floating in that basin of water. But that fluid is cerebral spinal fluid, and it's a very thin layer, but it surrounds the entire brain. So it protects it, it keeps it buoyant. And it circulates all the way around. How does it circulate? It circulates through these ventricles. This ventricular system manufactures cerebral spinal fluid. And where does the cerebral spinal fluid come from? Where do we get the fluid? What's that? From the blood system. Some of you are on this. They're like, that was a trick question, Keller, but I'm on to you. Good. It comes from the blood. The blood actually perfuses into the ventricular network, into a plexus of blood vessels known as the choroid plexus. Those are lined by these ependymal cells that we learned about. Those are a type of glial cell. And it filters the plasma from the blood. So you don't see red blood cells. It looks clear. Cerebrospinal fluid looks clear. It's colorless. It's odorless. But it's chock full of ions. Okay? So it's mostly water and ions and sugar. And these chambers, or ventricles, a ventricle is a word for a chamber. We have 4 of them. We have a right lateral, a left lateral, and then we have a third and a fourth. And the choroid plexus that sits beneath that arachnoid, the choroid plexus that exists in all of the 4 chambers is what produces cerebrospinal fluid. In addition to the ventricular network, you have that subarachnoid space that has that recirculating feature. So if we look at, in lab, you saw these models. They were the ones that looked like the Star Trek Enterprise. Okay? This is an anterior view from the front. This is a lateral view. You can see the lateral ventricle. This is the right lateral ventricle. This is the left lateral ventricle. Here's our third ventricle. Connects to the fourth ventricle via the cerebral aqueduct. And then here's our fourth ventricle. And then it comes down the central canal, which is down the spinal column, the vertebral column. And then it comes back around the subarachnoid space, up across the brain, and it drains back into the venous circulation. So it comes from the arterial circulation, and it drains back into the venous circulation. So the CSF, there's only about 150 milliliters of CSF fluid in the central nervous system in any one given period in time. The function is for buoyancy of the brain. It cushions and protects it. It maintains the chemical stability of the brain, where it helps to rinse this tissue away of waste products. Some students will ask, well, so there's no vascular system in the brain? No, there's that too. What? The circle of Willis, baby. Yeah. So the vasculature that exists within the brain is also present. That should tell you how critical it is for the brain and how metabolically active the brain is, where it really has 2 circulatory systems. It has the cerebrospinal fluid, and it has the typical vascular system that most other organs have. So the brain has 2 basic circulation systems. Now, you've heard of people that have done this, where they drink too much, and they have a hangover. You might see this happen next week, okay? Just walk away, let them recover. But you can mention to them, it's too bad you have too little CSF. Because what happens when you drink too much alcohol, alcohol is a diuretic, right? What does that mean? What does that word mean?
It makes you lose moisture.
It makes you lose moisture through your urethra, right? Meaning you pee a lot. So you increase urine production with caffeine and alcohol. Those are 2 diuretics. You're like, oh, that's why I'm always having to go to the bathroom when I have too much coffee. Well, caffeine and alcohol are both diuretics. If you increase outflow of fluid and your blood volume drops, what happens to the production of CSF? It goes down. You only have 150 mils, so you don't need a 10% change is huge. 10% change would be 15 mils less. And now you have the brain itself kind of sitting and resting on certain bony features, and that causes pain. That's what a lot of the hangover is pressure directly on the skull. So let's talk about how this flow works. How does this flow work throughout the brain? Well, number 1, the CSF is secreted by the choroid plexus, and that exists in each lateral ventricle. It flows through a foramina known as the intraventricular foramina into the third ventricle. Here, the choroid plexus adds more CSF to it. Every time it moves into a new ventricle, additional CSF is added to it. It flows down the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, and the fourth ventricle adds more fluid. It flows out of the fourth ventricle into two lateral apertures. The lateral apertures take it to the subarachnoid space, and the central median aperture takes it down the spinal cord. Eventually, it makes itself back up into the subarachnoid space, and at the arachnoid villi, it's actually drained back into the sinuses, the venous sinuses, so back into the venous circulation.
Which sinuses are the venous sinuses?
Sinuses are just a collection of venous architecture that takes it back into the vein side of the circulation.
Here and here.
Oh no, those are different types of sinuses. Those are mucous sinuses. These are filled with CSF. So a simpler way of looking at this is shown here. The choroid plexus of the lateral ventricles produce the CSF. It flows through the intraventricular foramina into the third. You add more fluid there through the mesencephalic aqueduct, which is also called what? The cerebral aqueduct. So two words for the same aqueduct. Goes into the fourth ventricle. You add more fluid there. From the fourth ventricle, you go into the subarachnoid space, and you drain it back into the venous circulation. Okay? Now, what happens if you back up this system? What happens if you back up the system? So, this is a disease state. This is an old picture. But I'm going to show and prove to you guys that this is a real deal today. This is hydrocephalus. This means water on the head. Hydrocephalus, water head. This is an overproduction of CSF or an under drainage, too little drainage or too much production. It causes pressure on the brain, and in this picture of this baby, you can see the brain is swelled because those fontanelles haven't closed. Remember the soft spots in the skull?
Yeah.
They continue to stay soft for the first year, and in some cases out to about 18 months. You have to make adjustments, otherwise you have a high mortality rate.
I'm wondering, would this child now have a shorter lifespan of permanent brain damage?
This one I don't have any case information on, but this one I do. And this is what I'm going to leave you with, is this last case study. This is a young girl, Runa Begum. I'm sure I'm butchering her name. This is in India. Some of the pictures may be very difficult to see, but this is her at 18 months of age. Okay? This is her. Yeah. This is her 94 centimeter circumference head. It's triple the size of a normal baby's head. This is a real picture. That's not CGI. Okay? There were two college-age students that were there visiting. They were very, very disturbed by this, and they decided to do crowdfunding. Okay? Her father, they put these little shunts in the brain to drain the fluid back into the venous circulation. In our country, it happens like that. You never see this. In other countries that don't have that kind of health care, this is lethal. Her eyes are open, but they're swollen shut because her head's so swollen. So, her father's a bricklayer. He earns less than $3 a day. They did some crowdfunding. These two students, they were Norwegian students. They were hoping to raise $1,600 for the surgery. And in 2 months, they raised more than $60,000. This is August 2013. She had the surgery right after that. Okay? This is her on Christmas Day, from August to Christmas. This is her coming out of the hospital. Okay? You can tell that it's a different country because there's military personnel, which is like the police, just normal police. This isn't unusual. They have automatic weapons, but that's their police network. So she looks much better. This is her recovering. Okay? This is her second corrective surgery. here. They had to do some corrective surgeries. And this is something that we struggle with in third world nations right now. Okay, this is 2013 to the end of 2013, early 2014. Okay, so this is only about a year to a year and a half ago that this actually took place.
Will this child ever have normal mental capacity?
We don't know yet. It's a little early to tell. I haven't found any new information. It's still pretty young to determine if there's any long-lasting effects. Okay, this is where we'll stop. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.